They locked the alien princess in a mental ward, but a human defied them all. The fluorescent lights hummed above the white corridors of Riverside Medical Center, and nobody questioned why the new patient in Ward 7 spoke in musical tones that made the air shimmer like heat waves on summer pavement. Nurse Katie Brooks pushed her medication cart down the hallway and paused outside room 714, where the strange woman sat cross-legged on her bed, and her skin held a faint silver luminescence that the doctors kept insisting was just a trick of the lighting. The woman called herself Lyra, and she claimed to be royalty from a star system called Andara Prime, and every staff member who heard her story nodded sympathetically and increased her dosage because that was what protocol demanded when patients showed signs of delusional thinking. Katie had worked in psychiatric care for 6 years, and she had heard every wild claim imaginable. But something about Lyra felt different, and the way her violet eyes tracked movement suggested an intelligence that medications could not dull. The patient had arrived 3 weeks ago after police found her wandering near the old radio telescope facility, and she wore clothes made from fabric that textile experts could not identify, and she spoke 19 languages fluently, including 3 that linguists swore did not exist on any database. Dr. Helen Price dismissed every anomaly with practiced ease, and she wrote extensive notes about trauma-induced psychosis and recommended electroconvulsive therapy. If the current treatment plan failed to show improvement, Katie watched Lyra through the observation window, and the alien woman was drawing complex mathematical formulas on her notepad with such speed and precision that her hand blurred, and when Katie entered the room later to collect the papers, she saw equations that looked like they belonged in a quantum physics journal. Nobody listened when Katie mentioned this to the medical director because nurses were expected to follow orders and not question the doctors who had decades of education behind their decisions. But Katie could not shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and she started spending her breaks researching the symbols Lyra drew and comparing them to scientific papers online. And what she found made her blood run cold because half of those equations were theories that humanity had not yet discovered. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night when Katie worked the late shift, and she found Lyra standing at her window and staring at the stars with such longing that it made Katie's heart ache. Lyra turned to her and spoke without the usual sedative slur, and she said that her ship had malfunctioned during a diplomatic mission and her guards were searching for her. But Earth's governments had jammed her distress beacon because they feared what her presence might mean. Katie wanted to dismiss it as another delusion. But then Lyra touched the window glass and it rippled like water, and she pulled her hand back quickly when she saw Katie's shocked expression. The nurse should have called security and reported the incident, but instead, she asked Lyra to prove she was telling the truth, and the alien princess smiled sadly and touched Katie's forehead with 2 fingers. And suddenly, Katie saw everything. She saw vast cities floating among the clouds of gas giants, and she saw vessels that could cross galaxies in heartbeats, and she saw Lyra's homeworld with its crystalline towers and triple moons, and she saw the Council of Elders who had sent Lyra to Earth as an ambassador of peace. When the vision ended, Katie stumbled backward and caught herself on the bed rail, and Lyra watched her with patient eyes that had seen centuries pass because her species lived much longer than humans. Katie asked why Lyra had not escaped yet if she possessed such abilities, and the princess explained that her powers were fading without proper nutrition, and the medications clouded her connection to the quantum field that her people used to manipulate matter and energy. The nurse made a decision that would change everything, and she began smuggling real food into Lyra's room instead of the bland hospital meals, and she reduced the medication dosages when no one was watching, and she started helping Lyra send messages through the radio telescope facility after hours. Dr. Price noticed the changes in her patient and grew suspicious, and she ordered increased security and scheduled the electroconvulsive therapy for Friday morning. Despite Katie's protests, Katie knew she had to act fast, and she spent 2 days planning an escape route through the service tunnels that connected to the loading dock, and she stole an orderly's keycard and waited for the perfect moment. Thursday night arrived with a thunderstorm that knocked out half the hospital's power systems, and in the chaos, Katie unlocked room 7-14 and found Lyra already standing and waiting because somehow she had known this moment would come. They ran through darkened hallways while alarms blared and security guards shouted behind them. And Katie led them through the maze of corridors she had memorized during her years of employment. The service tunnel smelled of disinfectant and old concrete, and their footsteps echoed off the walls as they raced toward freedom, and Katie could hear Lyra's breathing becoming stronger with each step as the medications left her system. They burst through the loading dock door into the rain, and Katie's car waited in the employee lot. But before they could reach it, a dozen vehicles surrounded them with spotlights blazing, and men in dark suits emerged with weapons drawn. Dr. Price stood among them with a tablet displaying evidence of Katie's theft and medication tampering, and she announced that the nurse would face criminal charges and psychiatric evaluation for helping a dangerous patient. Escape Katie felt her hope crumble, but then Lyra stepped forward and her skin began to glow with brilliant silver light that pushed back the darkness, and the rain stopped falling around them, as if held by an invisible barrier. The alien princess raised her hands and spoke in her musical language, and the sky above them tore open with colors that human eyes were not meant to perceive. And a ship descended through the storm clouds with grace that made Earth's aircraft look like crude toys Lyra's. Guards emerged from the vessel, and they wore armor that shifted like liquid mercury, and they surrounded the humans with weapons that hummed with contained power. But the princess commanded them to stand down because she would not allow violence on this world. She turned to Katie and thanked her for showing compassion when everyone else chose fear, and she promised that Earth would receive a formal diplomatic invitation once humanity proved ready to join the galactic community. Dr. Price demanded that the aliens leave immediately and threatened to call the military. But Lyra simply smiled and touched the doctor's forehead with the same gentle gesture she had used with Katie, and the woman fell silent as understanding flooded her mind. The princess offered Katie a choice, and she could return to her old life with memories intact, or she could join Lyra's crew and see the universe beyond Earth's sky. Katie looked back at the hospital where she had spent years following orders and ignoring her instincts, and then she looked at the alien vessel with its promise of adventure and truth, and she made her decision without hesitation. She took Lyra's hand and walked toward the ship while the storm resumed its fury, and the humans below watched in stunned silence as their prisoner ascended to freedom. The vessel rose through the atmosphere, and Katie pressed her face against the viewing port and watched her world shrink to a blue marble against the infinite black. And she felt no regret, because she had learned that sometimes the craziest stories turn out to be true. Lyra stood beside her and explained that they would stop at 3 more worlds before reaching Endara Prime, and Katie would need training to survive in environments where gravity and atmosphere differed from Earth, but she promised the journey would be worth every challenge. As they jumped to faster than light speed, Katie smiled because she had spent years caring for people that society had locked away and labeled as broken. And now she understood that sometimes the ones called crazy are simply seeing a bigger truth that others refuse to acknowledge. The princess had been freed, and Earth had taken its first real step toward the stars, and all because one nurse chose to listen when everyone else chose to medicate.